Welcome to Building Wealthy Habits podcast. Now, this features content and conversations with me, Randy Barkley, Jeremiah Lee, along with Laura Lee. On this podcast, we share financial advice from a team of certified financial planners, including a California licensed attorney, an MBA professional with collective experience of over 40 years.
This week, we are talking to anyone interested in short-term rentals. Real estate is such a valuable piece of people's portfolios, but we want to talk about what it looks like having a short-term rental, whether you already have one and you're managing it, or whether you're going to pick one up for a new plan in your life.
This is the first part of a 3-part series, and today Jeremiah and I talk about the financial and legal matters that you want to take into consideration before buying a short-term rental property. In part 2 of the series, we're going to talk to a real estate agent and broker in the Southern California region to talk about what it means to purchase a short-term rental property. And the third part of the series talks to an expert, a current owner of a growing company that owns short-term rental properties and invests in property management, and all about the topic of hospitality. So join us for part 1 of the series. All right, so I think it's kind of fun that even our kids have gotten into HGTV recently, and maybe for different reasons, but the whole family can gather around and watch an episode of HGTV, whatever it is, Property Brothers or whatever, and we all actually have quite a bit of fun.
I think it's their new favorite show, and it's hilarious that they're like, I would take the one with the bigger bathroom. Yeah, I would do that. Like they have like these opinions on houses. I think we were watching Property Brothers. I'm not sure.
Right.
But we don't have cable, so we often don't watch HGTV or things like that. However, we have access through streaming things. It's available, and so I think the kids found it and said, "Hey, what's this?" We're like, "Oh yeah, go ahead." And
our son likes all the demolition and the construction side of things. You know, I love it how the girls make decisions about renovation projects based on these enormous budgets. They don't even know what like, okay, do you want to spend $100,000 on that new kitchen? They're like, yeah, definitely. Yep. I think that's a good choice.
Mm-hmm. Paint it pink too. That's going to be the best. Yeah, that's right.
Like, oh no.
But I think it's a great mindset of thinking about how they care for property. What does property mean? Ownership versus just this is where I live. And I think it started a good conversation, I think, in our house of what property is and how do you care. And we've used it as how do you care for this, right? How do you care for what we have? How do we take care of it? Which in our house means cleaning, not banging things against the walls, things like that.
We're just talking about our primary residence, folks. But today, for our listeners, we are talking about short-term rentals. And so this is sort of an adjacent topic to financial planning. We have several clients, personal friends of ours that are involved either in owning short-term rental properties, long-term rental properties. Maybe they're in real estate. Maybe they're in finance in terms of loans and things like that. So we deal often with people that are either considering or currently own short-term rental properties. And so this is the first of a 3-part series where we're going to give we're going to touch on a variety of different topics. And so if this is something that strikes a chord with you or you're interested in learning more, of course, please reach out and let us know. But today we're going to talk about financial considerations and legal considerations to really to someone who is maybe considering the purchase of a short-term rental property.
Yeah, that's great. And I think the real estate in general is fantastic. We have so many clients that have 1 or 2 or 3 rentals, whether it's residential or a commercial building. And it really helps balance out their portfolio of saying they have stock exposure, if they also have this real estate exposure. But today we're moving slightly away from just real estate in general, but be these short-term rentals. And I think the dream, and I've heard this from people, I'm sure you have as well, is to say, hey, here's what we're thinking. We're going to buy a little spot down by the beach. It's going to be great. And we can't really afford it. That's okay. We're going to use Airbnb and we're going to rent it out a number of days. And that's going to cover our mortgage, cover our expenses, and we'll use it. and they'll use it. In fact, we probably just quit our jobs and use that money for, you know.
Yep. It's going to be wildly popular. It's going to go gangbusters. We don't even need a job anymore. We might as well just become short-term rental, just one property. Might even exactly. Because, okay, let's just acknowledge, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but TV, these various seasons, Chip and Joanna Gaines, love them. They are excellent at what they do. They have made this look so easy. But before you bet the farm, we want to put this idea within the proper context of your overall portfolio. And so, as you alluded to earlier, this is what we would consider an alternative investment. So when we look at investment management, we're talking a lot about stocks and bonds, but real estate, there's various ways to invest in real estate, but real estate in general is what we would consider kind of an alternative investment. So it being a part of your overall portfolio can be a great option, not typically, but can be a great option, but it's not a right fit for everyone.
Right. And a key thing about any real estate, whether it's long-term or short-term, is once you put the money in, it's what they call illiquid, meaning you can't just take it back out tomorrow. The money is in there. And usually to get that money back, you have to sell it. I mean, there's times you can refinance, there's times you can cash out that way. And then that's a different topic. But the general idea is if you wanted all that money back to do something different, you have to go through the process of fully selling the real estate, which might take you months, weeks to months. And so something that's very liquid is like cash in the bank, right? You can just go and get it. So that's the first piece is when you're making an investment, it's a long-term view. You can't just do this, on a whim. The other, I guess the first place I would start is kind of the where and when. People often think, when I've spoken with them, is these exotic locations to say, I want to go be by the beach. I want to be in the mountains. I want to be by a lake. Wouldn't that be cool to have a second home that I could rent out? That would be that would be cool. But often there's a market there that most people don't know. A local real estate agent, man, so valuable. Somebody who understands what it's like to rent next to that big hotel that's next door, so valuable, right? And so a lot of these times there's someone doesn't understand the location enough. So I think that's the first hurdle, right? Understanding where you're going to be.
And actually next week, just for a little teaser, we are having two friends of ours, real estate agents and brokers, one that represents really the Orange County area primarily, and one that represents Lake Arrowhead, which for us located in Southern California, those are two very popular areas to look at for vacation or short-term rental properties. So you talked about location. We talked about, if this is an idea that you have, you might be looking, right now we're recording this, it's June of 2024. It's going to be released in a few weeks. And so there's been a lot of consideration about interest rates. And so the question being, is now a good time to buy?
Yeah. And this is where, if your mind thinks like this as a listener, that Excel spreadsheet, right? It starts out with, we're going to get this much money, but then we got to pay the cleaning fees. And then we're going to pay the mortgage, and then we're going to pay all the different expenses that go down. Well, that mortgage line item is different today than it was 4 years ago. And it's hard to compare, someone who wants to get into an Airbnb compared to the one that someone is already running right next door, because they may have bought at an interest rate when it was, 2.5%, 3%, either the second home or first home or however they financed it, or they may have no mortgage. I mean, that's also an option, right? But the idea being right now, if you're going to walk into an Airbnb, you're probably a property that you want to buy for the purpose of Airbnb is probably a 6, 7, maybe 8%, depending on a number of things, what you're going to be able to finance that for. And those percentage differences on the value of a house are real money. That could be the difference between, hey, I really made it this month and we are positive cash flow, and oh no, there's an extra $1,000 that has to go to the mortgage, and we just are not going to make it this month. And for that, they call it penciling out. For that deal to kind of pencil out to the bottom number to say, hey, we're positive here. That mortgage is really tough. So for someone who's going to walk in with a low amount down, 10, 20% down for an investment property, and take on a large mortgage to get this property, you might have some big payments just because of the season we're in with high interest rates.
Yeah. And there are lots of online mortgage calculators. That's also something that someone like your financial advisor can help you, quote unquote, pencil out, but actually run the numbers. And so if we're looking at just kind of an arc of interest rates, as you were alluding to, 2020, 2021 was an extremely low season of interest rates. And so a lot of people were either refinancing or getting themselves into their home, their primary residence at 2.5%, 3% interest rates. But in terms of the overall history, just to give some perspective on interest rates, we're also not living in a season of, I think it was the late 70s, early 80s that Randy talks about, where he was talking about a 17% interest rate or higher. So we're very much in what we would consider kind of a moderate season of interest rates. And even if they soften or rise slightly, given that sort of 5 to 8%, that might be a range that we see for some time. So I wouldn't say that we're in a season of low or high. We're kind of in a moderate interest rate level.
Yeah, but prices, I would say, generally, especially in the Southern California area, are higher. They're higher than they've been years ago. So in the 70s, when they had very high interest rates, prices were relatively, compared to today, very low.
Yeah.
Whereas today we have some high prices with high interest rates, which make some of this unaffordable. But let's assume you either have the finances to do this, or you're able to walk in to get this property. So if you're able to get the property and you're thinking about that and you can afford the mortgage, what do we think of next?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, which you talked about earlier, is location, location, location. Not only is there a demand, yes, this is a popular vacation spot. Tons of people are going to want to come here to rent this property, but maybe that market is already saturated. And so do your research. You were using Airbnb as almost just a direct euphemism for a short-term rental property, but pop onto Airbnb, look at VRBO, look at airdna.com. That's another one that we would recommend. So do your research. Look at what the demand is in the location, as well as how populated in terms of short-term rentals. Who are you competing against? And then next, dial in the numbers. You said run the numbers. Develop an Excel spreadsheet. Talk about realistically what capital you would have to put down, what you would be financing, at what rate, and then talk about the additional expenses. When you look at a property for your primary residence, you're looking for different attributes of that property than you are for a short-term rental property. And so there might need to be some renovations, some changes to make it easy to use as well as easy to exchange tenants. You want to look at marketing. How are you going to solicit, renters to come and use your Airbnb, your short-term rental property? Cleaning fees, security systems become really important for a short-term rental property. We're talking utilities. You want to estimate what rental value. So this is an income-producing asset, right? So you want to estimate not only what maximum occupancy would be, but maybe less than maximum occupancy. So you want to look at some averages. You want to look at high side, low side, because you're trying to assess your risk in this investment. Rainy day fund, things happen. The roof might get a leak. Do you have the additional cash to be able to cover the expenses that you might not even be expecting for that property? And then ultimately I would come to, and I know you want to comment on this, purchasing a short-term rental property and financing a portion of that is going to have an impact on your personal finances, your debt-to-income ratio. And banks will look at that for further financing, et cetera. So anyways, do you have something to add there?
Yeah, I think you mentioned occupancy rates. I just want to touch on that. AirDNA is a great website where it's not just that you would book something. It actually farms the data from Airbnb and VRBO, some of those other websites, and brings it back. So you could say in a certain area, what is my expected rent? What is my expected occupancy? And we had a client we're having a discussion with, and they had a great opportunity, but when we looked through there, just kind of helping them think through the opportunity, on the AirDNA website, it was showing that they would not have meaningful occupancy. That although they could get a good rate for it, they might rent it 10 times a year, which although seems nice, to go through all the effort to convert it to an Airbnb, 10 rentals a year is not going to pay for anything meaningful. And it was a good eye opener to them to say, hey, if we just put this on the market and hope people show up, they won't. This would take real marketing, real efforts to promote it. So, and that was a great comment on that occupancy. And then the other one about your personal, I mean, if you have one or two other properties, most people see that as an asset, and it is, right? It's this great asset. But when banks look at that, they see it as an asset and as a liability. And they want to see, okay, for all the payments that you have to make as an individual, all these mortgages, how are they going to be paid? How are they being covered? So it'd be real unfortunate to get two or three of these lined up, kind of maxing out your debt to income ratio. And then you decide to move just your personal house, and run into financial issues of trying to get a new loan because you have so much debt across the board.
Right.
Even if the Airbnbs are paying for it, often banks want to have, for a business, they want to have 2 years of financials. So if you haven't been running these Airbnb businesses for 2 years, you may struggle. So of course, work with a mortgage broker. There's all sorts of ways to get around some of that, but it could be a struggle for someone. So that's a great comment.
Well, I like that you brought up that idea of, yes, these are considered an asset. Yes, these are considered an investment tool, but they're also an added liability. And so there's ways to structure. We're going to talk about that next in terms of like the legal matters related to a short-term rental property, but there is personal liability associated with running these properties as well. If somebody's on your property and they can claim negligence, the sidewalks weren't cleaned off, they slipped, they fell, they broke their leg, there's personal liability that you take on by owning and renting these properties. And, for some, again, all of these various media platforms make it look easy. And sure, if you had an ideal tenant come, they're so grateful. They love the experience. It's their best family vacation they've ever had. They're going to come back next year. That's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario is they show up, there's a blizzard, they're trapped, they're stuck, they have no food, the heater goes out, whatever. They're calling you on the weekends, the plumbing's backed up. It could produce exceptional income, but not without the cost of a lot of work. And so I think having a realistic perspective going into it to say, do I want to be the one to manage these properties? Or do I just want to be the investor, and do I want to hire someone else to manage the properties? And if so, what are they going to charge? Because that's going to cut into the profit that you're going to earn there. So you want to make sure that you have adequate insurance to cover that added liability. And you want to make sure that you've had that conversation either with yourself or your spouse regarding property management, because they're a lot of work for sure.
It's a lot of work. That's a great comment. I think the other one I think of when I think of liability is also just the legality of having a short-term rental. There's a number of areas and cities who have tried to block them to say, we don't want short-term rentals. Or if you do have a short-term rental, here are some rules that you have to abide by, parking, how much trash can be out on the curb. There's a number of things they'll put in place. And I know there's some cities who have completely stopped it. I don't know if it's still there, but I think Big Bear up in the mountains, I believe they passed some ordinances that they stopped some of these short-term rentals.
Lake Arrowhead put a moratorium or a pause on it for a certain amount of time because they just saw too many short-term rental properties coming up in their area. So they paused it. They reopened it since then. But, this goes back to the location. You want to look into the sort of local rules and regulations that govern short-term rental properties within the area that you're looking to buy.
Yeah. And if there's a city that were to change the rules, they're all in dynamic shifting. But if they were to change, some places you get grandfathered in, others it may not. And so I think that's a real wise discussion to say, hey, if I can't Airbnb this the way that I think, what am I going to get? Or if you have something you want to list as sleeps 8, but you only get a license to sleep 4, that may change things meaningfully. So there's a legal aspect. And the last part I'll say on legal is even the legal structuring of, do you put this in an LLC? Do you just hold this in an individual name? Those are valid questions, and those impact your liability, your insurance, your mortgaging. All that is related. And so I think it's a good piece to consider as you move down that road. One of many, but a good piece to say, how am I legally going to structure this? And what rules in my local city am I going to have to, what hoops do I have to jump through? And they may be easy, they may be very difficult.
Yeah, if you don't even mind sharing, we sat down in a meeting yesterday with a client who holds multiple properties, and we talked about the corporate structure that would benefit them, both from a liability perspective, but also from an income and tax perspective. So we talked about utilizing one or more LLCs. This particular client owns more than one property, but essentially, if you structure the properties within one or more LLCs, maybe there's various ways to structure it, but one of those acting as the sort of property management entity, and so that entity is the one to from an accounting perspective and a tax perspective, they're essentially the entity that will receive all the income as well as take note of any expenses related to that property. So the accounting kind of stays siloed within that LLC. You as the owner are essentially hired by the property management company, and so you can receive an income from that LLC. And there's some strategy around that in terms of tax. Do you want to share kind of some of the things we talked about?
Yeah, I mean that we don't. The idea of structuring the LLCs for a scenario we were talking through is to funnel a lot of the income from various properties into one entity, as the manager, and then to put a retirement plan on that entity. And so the owners who are now working as property managers could now have a retirement plan, whether it's like a 401k, which most people are used to, or even a defined benefit plan, which is a bit more powerful type of a plan. And the whole idea with this was to not just receive the income, was to funnel the income into an entity that, one, had liability protections, but also then could boost the retirement for the coming years.
Yeah.
And not have current active taxes.
Yeah, and it can be a lever for tax planning. So if it's a season where they're high income earners, they're already paying, the highest tax rate, or the highest tax rate is being applied within their lifetime. To have that retirement plan gives them a lever to say, okay, we're going to invest however much over into this retirement plan to reduce their earned income.
Yeah. And that's often when we interact with people. They've made some choices, they're going down a good path, but their life is getting a lot more complex. Right. Mm-hmm. And there's things they are aware that they are not aware of. They know they don't know all the details. They have a vision, they have a dream, they have a focus, they know where they want to get to. But between here and there's a lot of changes and adjustments that need to happen. And often that's where I think you and I come in and have really a lot of joy with these clients of talking through where they want to get to, what their dreams are, what their vision is, but then also bringing the legal and the financial aspects together and really charting out a path for them that helps them get there. And I'm not amazed, but I'm thrilled on a regular basis when we can come to a meeting like that and present an idea and you see light bulbs start going on. There's immediate value of saying, hey, we can do it in a different way that's going to get you to that goal. And short-term rentals, long-term rentals, real estate are such pivotal and valuable pieces of people's portfolios and their plans, but they all need to work together. And I think that's a big piece of being holistic. And I tell people on a regular basis, you need somebody in your life who knows your whole life, yep. Right? Who's not just your stock guy, who's not just your real estate guy or your finance woman or your accountant, but it's somebody who has the full picture, because often these things can overlap in a way that is beneficial. Most people don't put their retirement plan and their short-term rental together, right? They don't think of that, but there's opportunity there.
Right. We get to play quarterback, and I like that illustration because, you may have, as speaking for our client, an excellent CPA, somebody that you've worked with for years, and they can educate you on all the tax implications of owning a short-term rental property and the personal use rules and depreciation. They may be able to inform you of those things, but like you talked about before, there are the phases of consciousness, the conscious incompetence, right? That there's things that you don't know. And that's where we get to play quarterback to look at the holistic picture and say, well, what's the strategy, right? How do we maximize these various, investments, your overall portfolio? And so we get to work alongside the CPAs. We gather all that information, but put it together in such a way that really benefits where you're trying to go and what you're trying to do. Short-term rental properties are a fantastic investment tool for those who have all the knowledge, have the right strategy in place and have the capital to invest. So we're going to move on to part 2 of the series, where again, we're talking with some real estate professionals in local areas that are very popular here in Southern California. And then part 3 of this series is we're going to talk to an expert that I know, someone who owns and runs a business for property management and short-term rentals, and talk all about hospitality. How can you wow your guests? And of course, what you're looking for there is repeat customers and retention. So lots of topics. It's a really fun subject matter, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you for leading us through this. This is your kind of idea to talk to this. We have this conversation with clients, and I think you wanted to bring it to more of a public arena. So I appreciate the thought, and hopefully this is helpful to our viewers of thinking through what it might look like to add real estate to their life vision.
Yep. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at tricordatvisors.com. We'd love to talk to you. Thanks so much for listening. We have a few more things to let you know about before we go. Podcast reviews really help us to serve more people and get this information into the hands of the people who need it. Please leave us a review. Even if it's not 5 stars, we welcome the feedback.
And we invite you to let us know what topics you would like to hear more about, or what would benefit the people in your life who you're closest to. We have more resources online Those resources are designed to help you share this great information easily with people in your life. To access those resources, please visit tricoreadvisors.com.
Often we hear from clients that they wish they had talked to us sooner. If that's you, we'd be thrilled to see how financial planning can benefit your life. Email us at contact@tricoreadvisors.com or simply click on the link in the show notes.
This show was produced by Graham Gardner at Model FA. Find out more about how to create a podcast for your financial planning business by visiting modelfa.com. We love creating content that's useful, resourceful, and maybe even a little entertaining. We want to make this mega universe of financial topics and advice applicable and helpful to your life.
Remember, at Tricord Advisors, we are your future's best ally.